As a sliver of midnight moonlight in 1710 Paris slanted across the weathered wooden doors of the Carmelite convent, the air was steeped in the faint scent of dry hay and the lingering warmth of aged bombs. Within a narrow cell encased by heavy stone walls, its window frames loosened by time, an elderly woman with silvering hair and a countenance etched with the furrows of experience, yet still possessing a noble grace, sat in quietude before a flickering oil lamp. She was not revisiting the lavish love letters that once marked her as the jewel of Versailles. Instead, her trembling fingers traced a passage on forgiveness upon a creased parchment. At 66, she had passed 36 autumns in this silent cloister, devoid of both applause and silken finery. She was Louise de la Vallière, the first true love of Louis XIV. This is a chronicle of how restraint ignites power and how despair is transmuted into nobility. The genesis of Louise de la Vallière's life held none of the ostentation of a rising courtier. Rather, it was a soft foundation woven from the violets and the most meticulous aristocratic education within the tranquil forests of the Loire Valley. As a scion of a declining noble house, she inherited a microcosm that was ruthlessly disciplined, steeped in refinement and practiced forbearance. Beneath breeze-swept colonnades, she mastered the art of capturing the truest pulses of emotion with a mere glance. Youthful and serene, she eschewed the superficial social climbing favored by her peers, turning instead to the quiet embrace of classical history and rhetoric within the sanctuary of her study. This near-obsessive pursuit of emotional purity became the first unhealable crease in her psychological landscape. When she first caught the gaze of Louis XIV, she felt not ecstasy, but a profound, fatalistic tremor. She understood that royal favor was not a reward, but a prohibitively expensive transaction of the soul. If their early encounter was a caprice of destiny, her subsequent years as a favored courtier within the gilded halls of Versailles served as the practical proof of her aesthetics of patience. As the first official mistress of the Sun King, she exhibited no hubris. On the contrary, within those chambers encrusted with gold, she appeared perpetually troubled. In the dead of night, she would analyze public opinion for the king, using words as soft as silk yet as resilient as tempered steel to inject a sliver of human compassion into his grand ambitions. This was a gambit without the smoke of battle, yet it forged her courtly persona into an intellectual counterattack. In those hours, she was the most lucid woman in all of France, using silence to absorb every derisive mockery of her station. This radical focus rendered her like a violet blooming in the deep shadows of the power struggle, fragile, yet utterly inviolable. The summit of power is often accompanied by the most clandestine betrayals of human nature. As Louis XIV's gaze drifted toward the more predatory and ambitious Madame de Montespan, Louise felt the hollow void of being discarded by her era. She did not weep for mercy. Instead, she stood before the king's window like a marble statue, issuing a singular request in a chillingly composed tone: "Since you no longer require my soul to illuminate your nights, allow me to surrender this vessel to God." Louis XIV repeatedly denied her departure, attempting to preserve her as one would an outmoded ornament. Yet in the deep, ironic hours of the courtly night, Louise knew that the only true salvation lay in total disappearance. This expansive clarity, born of seeing beyond the rise and fall of kings, became the most unyielding bedrock of her character, allowing her to face the ritual cutting of her hair with a serenity as cool as moonlight. The final season of Louise de la Vallière was spent in a state of profound solemnity and a silence illuminated by the radiance of a sage. On a morning in 1674, before the dawn had fully touched the fountains of Versailles, she shed her final gown of silk. Before the altar of the convent, she requested that her once celebrated golden tresses be shorn to the root. At that moment, the sharp, rhythmic snip of the scissors severed her last connection to that epoch of opulence. For the next 36 years, this woman who once held the emotional pulse of an empire rose at 4 each morning to toil in frigid kitchens and labor in damp vegetable gardens. She closed her eyes, and with those hands that had once guided the heartstrings of the Sun King, she folded them in a final arc of peace. The currents of the Seine carried away her last sigh, leaving behind a wisdom of dignity that remains searing even 3 centuries later. Even today, 3 centuries after her passing, the name of Louise de la Vallière remains the sole sanctuary for many a restless seeker in the dead of night. What she left behind was not a triumphal column piercing the heavens, but a spiritual template for self-restraint and the noble exit. She teaches us that even if the entire world treats you as a pawn, and even if your era is destined for collapse, the order within your heart is governed solely by your own perception of truth. She was one of those rare figures in history who truly mastered the art of bridging the chasm between worldly splendor and sacred silence. Beneath the site of the old convent, its edges now smoothed by time, she remains in a posture of eternal contemplation. Louise's quiet vigil for the self has crossed the boundaries of geography and time, living on in every soul that yearns for reality and the unknown. The saga of Louise de la Vallière thus draws to a slow close amidst the fading bells of the Carmelites. She was never an opportunist who bartered for fame, She was merely a weary soul who steadfastly refused to compromise with mediocrity. She reminds us that no matter how mundane or fragmented your life may be, inner tranquility is your only true and eternal refuge. Just as she sat through the coldest winter nights of Paris, clutching a guttering candle to find a fulcrum for existence within the void through the tip of her pen. Perhaps you, too, are navigating the uncertainties of life at this moment. But believe this, in every life, there exists a silent season of one's own, a private space for dialogue with a self that requires no outward explanation. May the serenity and vastness of Louise become the softest feather in your dreams, carrying you toward that most peaceful and expansive shore of the inner soul. Good night.